I saw her on a TV show, and I'd never seen her before, and I said, that's it. I said, whoever she is, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to take a chance. And we did, and she was wonderful.
At 88, Robert Redford names the 7 actors he hated the most. For years, Robert Redford carried himself like Serenity wrapped in charisma, Hollywood's composed icon amidst a sea of ego and chaos. While some careers burned fast and loud, Redford's path remained steady, never scandalous, always golden, and rarely reactive. He avoided the tabloids, kept his reputation clean, and resisted the urge to spill secrets until now. At 88, the Oscar-winning legend is speaking truths that those in his inner circle whispered about for decades. Not all his peers brought joy to the set. Some, he confesses, made acting feel like war. There were behind-the-scenes battles, tensions with fellow legends, and silent feuds that stained even the most celebrated films. These aren't half-truths or vague tales. They're facts, and some of the names might sting more than expected. By the time Redford finishes naming names, you might never watch a few cinematic masterpieces with the same affection again. Take Gene Hackman, for example. Their only major collaboration was Downhill Racer, but it felt like a lifetime. Despite appearing on casting lists for other joint ventures, the two actors never formed even a basic friendship. Hackman, known for his explosive technique and aggressive style, constantly clashed with Redford's measured approach. From rehearsal rooms to the actual set, Hackman would erupt, disregard directors, and bulldoze through scenes without pause. Though Redford once confided that Hackman was undeniably talented, he privately loathed how reckless he could be. At first, there was mutual admiration between them, but it faded quickly into discomfort and emotional distance. Redford valued Hackman's tireless dedication, but not the emotional wreckage that followed in his wake. For Hackman, acting was combat. He went in swinging, and others had to either brace or break. Directors tried to stay neutral, but co-stars often suffered from the fallout of Hackman's on-set storms. Redford, who prized thoughtful direction and mutual respect, saw Hackman as a storm in a still pond. As one assistant director recalled, working with Hackman was a gamble. Brilliance or belligerence, nothing in between. Minor arguments flared up often, but one encounter truly fractured their already tense connection. During a quiet, emotional scene, Hackman threw a fit over what he considered bad lighting, and refused to film. Production stalled for nearly an hour, and no one, not even the director, could sway him. Eventually, Redford walked over, opened Hackman's trailer door, and said bluntly in front of the crew, "This isn't about your ego, Gene. This is a group project. Be part of it or leave it." Hackman returned to the scene, but their personal relationship ended in that moment without recovery. Behind closed doors, Redford reportedly described Hackman as a wrecking ball in a room full of glass violins. It was never about questioning Hackman's abilities, but about surviving his presence without damage. Redford, who had begun producing and directing by the late 70s, would quietly block Hackman's name from casting talks. In the margins, he scribbled things like unmanageable or brilliant, but exhausting. Never again. Though they both rose to the top of Hollywood and earned Oscars, they were worlds apart on set. And after Downhill Racer, they avoided future collaborations like opposing magnets, close but never touching again. When someone once asked Redford if he regretted the lack of future work with Hackman, he smiled diplomatically. "Some artistic sparks," he said, "only need to fly once to know they'll burn the house down." That was all he offered, and it was all he needed to say. Redford once called Hackman a great talent, but also made it clear he had little patience for wreckage. Then there's James Woods. Redford's tension with him wasn't based on shared screen time, but conflicting ideologies. Though Woods never landed a major role alongside him, he auditioned for Redford's projects multiple times. Each time he was turned down, not for lack of skill, but for incompatibility Redford couldn't ignore. Not long after, Redford admitted he felt an overwhelming discomfort around Woods, finding it nearly impossible to remain in the same space. A now infamous casting session reportedly ended with Redford walking out. Woods had challenged him on Vietnam policy during a read for a courtroom drama. Instead of bringing focus, he stirred up disruption where calm was needed, Redford later reflected. Managing that kind of intensity wasn't something Redford ever signed up for. Politics only worsened the dynamic. To Redford, whose demeanor was always measured and calm, Woods' confrontational approach was like breathing smog in a forest. While Woods often carried himself like the smartest man in the building, Redford had no appetite for those mental chess matches. Reflecting on their earliest interaction, Redford reportedly remarked that Woods didn't care about telling the story, he aimed to own it. They stood at extreme ends of the artistic spectrum, with Redford thriving on quiet emotional depth and Woods firing off like a live wire. He could blow your mind with brilliance, one casting director remembered, but surviving that brilliance was part of the ordeal. And for Redford, enduring the storm wasn't worth the gamble. Among casting professionals, their clash eventually became industry legend. A particularly fraught audition took place in the late 80s while Redford was casting for a courtroom thriller. Woods showed up, delivered his lines with surgical sharpness, then stopped cold to argue about the line's political intent. An acting rehearsal turned rapidly into a heated Cold War debate. Redford let him speak for barely 2 minutes before shutting the script and walking away. "If I wanted to argue politics," he said dryly afterward, "I'd enroll in college again." In later years, Woods didn't stop poking the bear. He took jabs at Redford through interviews and industry panels. While Woods never named names, he often railed against Hollywood peace lovers who ran productions like military operations. Insiders familiar with the backstory easily read between the lines. Redford, however, kept his silence in public. But those close to casting knew Woods had been erased quietly and completely. One casting sheet reportedly bore just 3 words beside Woods' name: "Never, ever, again." Though undeniably talented and perfect for roles dripping with edge and volatility, Woods had crossed a line. There's a fine distinction between creative friction and destructive chaos, Redford once told a friend. And he believed Woods never quite grasped that boundary. The roles stopped coming. The phone calls faded. As Woods' reputation spiraled more into noise than nuance, Redford remained largely mum. Save for a few biting remarks in closed-door conversations, he refused to publicly fan the flames. He disrupted places that needed stillness, Redford repeated years after it all ended. "I never signed up to babysit chaos." Even Dustin Hoffman, Redford's co-star in All the President's Men, became a source of silent irritation. Redford may have helped cement their status as one of cinema's greatest on-screen duos, but he grew weary of Hoffman's improvisational habits. Hoffman would often veer from scripts or shift blocking mid-take, which clashed hard with Redford's methodical, director-focused style. To Redford, it felt like Hoffman didn't want to share the camera. He wanted to control it. People never saw them argue, but when someone asked why they never reunited on screen, Redford brushed it off with, "Once was enough." At first glance, it looked like cinematic gold, 2 icons of 70s Hollywood diving into the Watergate saga together. But deeper inside, the collaboration was anything but smooth. Where Redford was exacting and deeply prepared before each shoot, Hoffman leaned into improvisation, shifting lines mid-scene and sometimes throwing off Redford's deliberate build-up. Members of the crew remembered the energy on set, tense, hushed, not explosive, but constantly simmering with quiet discomfort. Hoffman might block a scene in rehearsal one way, but once the camera rolled, he would subtly move to pull focus or step into Redford's carefully lit frame. Redford initially told himself it was all part of the artistic messiness, but over time, the constant unpredictability began to take its toll. A newsroom scene with Hoffman on the phone reportedly dragged on for 7 takes, each version unpredictable, making it hard for Redford to stay emotionally in sync. By the final take, Redford was reportedly furious, holding back his reactions while trying to stay professional. Director Alan J. Pakula walked the tightrope skillfully, never letting things erupt, but the cast and crew could feel the undercurrent. "Bob was swallowing his frustration," said a lighting technician who watched every subtle exchange unfold. Off-camera, Redford vented about the narrative slipping through their fingers, frustrated by the fragmentation creeping into their performances. "We're here to craft a story," he was heard telling Pakula once during a pause in filming, "not chase after a million disjointed moments." Even so, the director managed to keep both men engaged, ensuring a brilliant outcome despite the tension lurking beneath the surface. Redford, who later thrived as a director himself, believed in structure, timing and collaborative discipline above all. To Redford, filmmaking was a synchronized effort, but Hoffman's lone wolf approach often clashed with that mindset. Redford never publicly bashed Hoffman, but when reunion specials and retrospectives were floated years later, he always turned them down. There was no dramatic fallout or headline-worthy feud, just two men who wordlessly agreed to part ways. Sometimes, even if the result is iconic, the process reveals how deeply people differ. Though they stayed cordial, Redford's "once was enough" response said everything about his stance. Another instance played out with Tom Cruise during Lions for Lambs, a film that barely survived the friction behind the camera. Redford, who also directed the project, found it nearly impossible to connect with Cruise's business-first attitude. "Everything was about image," Redford would later say, "not heart, not truth, just brand value." Cruise reportedly suggested numerous changes, scenes, framing, even rewrites, many of which clashed with Redford's original vision. The film tanked at the box office, and Redford left the experience deeply disappointed. From the outside, the pairing looked like a brilliant idea. Redford, the seasoned auteur; Cruise, the box office powerhouse looking to rebrand. But as soon as things got moving, it was clear they were speaking different creative languages. Redford had envisioned a grounded, thought-provoking drama, while Cruise leaned into visuals, sound bites, and cross-platform messaging. What could have been synergy turned into a mismatch from the very first production meeting. As a co-producer, Cruise wanted the final word on everything, from trailer color grading to scene rhythm. He often arrived at meetings backed by a small army of media handlers, filling the room with buzzwords like audience metrics and market resonance. Redford, who once spent 72 hours rehearsing a single wordless moment, was quietly horrified by the contrast. The rehearsal phase alone made it clear this collaboration was doomed from the outset. Cruise made sure stylists were nearby during even the early blocking, apparently to project a tightly controlled image. Later, Redford reflected dryly, "What I wanted was fragility, what he wanted was balance." From the outset, the two seemed to be filming entirely different stories. To Redford, it was a warning of broken systems, while Cruise treated it like a hero's comeback tale. As filming went on, tensions became harder to ignore. Cruise regularly interrupted scenes to tweak lighting or pitch new dialogue that hadn't been written. Redford, ever the professional, tried to adjust in good faith. But by the third week, he'd clearly had enough. According to one production assistant, Redford once leaned close during a take and murmured, "Is this acting, or are we crafting a campaign pitch?" It was a sharp moment that revealed just how far apart they drifted in approach. Cruise's influence didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. In post, he reportedly pushed for alternate cuts of his scenes, even debating the length of a single reaction. Redford, initially tolerant, let him run with it. But once the studio backed Cruise instead, he washed his hands of the entire thing. Redford turned in the best version he could manage, then stepped away. He skipped most of the press entirely. The film eventually landed with a thud. Mediocre reviews, soft box office. Cruise moved forward. Redford went silent. For Redford, it wasn't just a project that didn't land. It was a deeper creative rift. He saw one man trying to make a point and another just selling a product. Their collaboration ended there, and Redford never spoke to Cruise again. That chapter was closed for good. As for Faye Dunaway, 3 Days of the Condor might have been a hit on screen, but the atmosphere on set told a different story. Privately, the vibe was icy at best. Redford and Dunaway's chemistry didn't extend beyond what the camera captured. Behind the scenes, the energy between them was noticeably strained. Dunaway, known for her precision and intensity, frequently locked horns with the director. Redford often found himself stuck in the middle of those clashes. She wasn't hard to work with because she was passionate, a crew member recalled. She was difficult because she didn't put her faith in anyone, not even him. Redford later described her as a storm in heels. From day one, their partnership looked impressive on paper. He was at the top of his career, steady, bankable, and easygoing. She had just come off Chinatown and was hailed as one of the most magnetic talents of her time. But when it came to their methods, they were polar opposites. Redford prized subtlety and simplicity, while Dunaway approached every shoot like a battlefield. She guarded her process fiercely, unafraid to push back on directors or even Redford himself. Every day she came armed, with notes, demands, and questions. She'd ask to rewatch dailies, rewrite scenes the night before, or even alter lighting setups midday. Redford, who thrived on trust and forward motion, began to view the project less as art and more as arbitration. During a break, a script supervisor once overheard Redford sigh, "We're here to discover truth, not micromanage every comma." That summed up how far apart their visions had grown. The on-screen electricity between them? That wasn't acting. It was real, volatile tension bleeding into their performances. Dunaway would request retakes for the smallest tweaks, down to a single syllable. Redford, more of a one-and-done actor, began to visibly chafe at the repetition. At one point, after she asked for yet another reset, he mumbled, "We're not crafting a Swiss timepiece." The exhaustion was starting to show. The breaking point came behind closed doors in a meeting with director Sidney Pollack. Dunaway was dissecting her character's emotions. Redford, silent at first, finally exploded. "It's espionage, Faye, not Chekhov," he snapped. The room went dead silent. She left without a word. By the next day, she was back, acting as though it never happened. But the damage was done, and the atmosphere never quite recovered. No matter how intimate their scenes looked, there was no real warmth between them. It didn't take long before word got out. Redford had allegedly insisted on using a body double for close-up shots once Dunaway left the set. Years after the shoot, when questioned during a press junket about her, he gave a small, restrained smile and replied, "She's unforgettable." Notably, no follow-up projects came after. No celebratory gatherings, no retrospective interviews. Diving into their creative process, she wasn't considered difficult due to passion. Someone on the team recalled otherwise. She was hard to work with because she didn't trust a soul. Not even Redford. Redford himself described her differently, calling her a storm in heels. In contrast, Robert Duvall was a different kind of storm altogether. Despite sharing the screen in The Natural, their styles collided like flint and steel. Duvall came in with an instinct-driven, improvisational method that grated against Redford's meticulously prepared style, and sparks flew fast. It reached a boiling point when Redford requested Duvall stick to the lines during a vital scene. Duvall's flat refusal led to a verbal standoff still whispered about on sets. Recalling the tension later, Redford summed it up simply, "Duvall wanted jazz. I wanted structure. It wasn't harmony, it was static." From the moment cameras started rolling, it was obvious their energy was oil and water. Redford treated the film like a carefully orchestrated concerto, meticulously crafting Roy Hobbs from the ground up, every breath and blink calibrated. "Duvall?" He marched in unprepared, note-free, and convinced that truth came from impulse, not planning, and it showed in every scene. Initially, Redford was drawn to Duvall's raw magnetism. His portrayal of Max Mercy pulsed with unpredictable, lived-in edge. But unpredictability quickly turned into instability, as Duvall began rewriting lines mid-prep and altering emotional tone take by take. Known for his composure, Redford began to fray. The method clash wasn't just professional, it ran deep. They weren't merely two different actors, they were opposite worlds. Redford, methodical and meditative, Duvall, wild and confrontational. This contrast simmered beneath the surface throughout filming, never exploding, never settling. A crew member put it best, geniuses, both, but they weren't filming the same story. Then came the pivotal breakdown, a major confrontation scene meant to anchor Redford's character arc, unraveled on set. While Redford aimed for a layered, precise emotional note, Duvall kept breaking the rhythm with mocking, unscripted jabs. Redford, losing patience, halted everything and said directly, "This isn't your film." Without missing a beat, Duvall retorted, "It's no one's film until it feels real." The two clashed for 15 long minutes while everyone stood frozen. No words from the crew, just cameras quietly observing. One sound technician compared the moment to watching a spark ignite a wildfire, silent but unstoppable. Director Barry Levinson finally stepped in and salvaged the scene. Barely. The aftermath, though, lingered. When Redford was later asked about Duvall, his words were spare. "He's brilliant, but never again." Duvall remained publicly silent, but never stood beside Redford again, not even for interviews or tours. There wasn't a shortage of opportunities to reunite, they just didn't want to reopen that chapter. Redford later echoed the same metaphor that summed it up all too well. He played jazz. I wanted a score. What came out wasn't music. It was mess. Now here's the shocker. Paul Newman, of all people, was the one Redford called out next. The name alone conjured images of iconic duos, Butch Cassidy, The Sting, legends side by side. But the truth ran quieter. According to Redford, their bond was more fragile than fans ever suspected. He was charming, Redford admitted, but he kept me at arm's length. He added that Newman often acted clueless to get away with more. It wasn't a dramatic blow-up, just a fading sense of trust. As Newman began asserting more control as producer on The Sting, Redford couldn't ignore the change. Redford eventually admitted, he wasn't my partner anymore. He became my rival. Though their bond didn't shatter completely, it slowly cooled into distant politeness. What the public saw was pure movie magic, two legends in perfect sync. Newman radiated smooth confidence and drew people in with ease, while Redford simmered with quiet intensity. Together, they rewrote the rulebook on what a Hollywood leading man could be. They were witty, dangerously likable, and refreshingly self-aware on screen. Privately, though, Redford always felt like there was something Newman kept locked away. There was a wall between them, one Redford never quite scaled. On Butch Cassidy, their friendship had been free-flowing. Laughter, heat, and sand-filled days. But when they reunited for The Sting, the dynamic had clearly shifted. Newman's authority had grown. He now walked into meetings surrounded by power players. He came prepared with thoughts on everything from casting to camera angles. Redford, still absorbed in the artistic side of things, felt quietly edged out. It went from being a duo making a film, said one crew member, to two grandmasters circling aboard. Redford rarely voiced his irritation, but those close to him saw the strain. He deeply respected Newman, but hated always playing second fiddle in the press. During joint interviews, Newman got the spotlight while Redford answered follow-ups. Paul was the headline, Redford once reflected, and I was the footnote at the bottom. Over the years, they remained courteous. Tributes, appearances, even photo ops happened. Despite opportunities, they never found another project to reunite on. Scripts came and went, but nothing got past the first hurdle. Asked about it, Redford would often brush it off as poor timing. Insiders, however, knew better. It wasn't about schedules, it was about security. There was no dramatic fallout, just the quiet unraveling of mutual confidence. Newman had charm, Redford conceded, but he never let you in completely. He also hinted that Newman occasionally played dumb to dodge accountability. No screaming match ended them, just years of cautious distance settling in. From the outside, it looked like respect. Underneath, it was fatigue. And though Redford never made a public scene, the private toll was real. Some names still sting when he thinks of those collaborations. Others he expected would eventually fray, but it doesn't make it easier. In the end, what emerges is a new picture of a man once believed to be untouched by friction. Because even Hollywood's golden boy had partnerships that left bruises. And for every glowing role he played, Redford walked through a little more shadow.